So hello, welcome to this impromptu episode of Something Who. I just heard the sad news this afternoon that Terrance Dicks had died. We wanted to put on a celebration of Terrance and what he'd meant to us as Doctor Who fans. So I'm joined by Tim.
Hello!
And also by Paul.
Hello there.
And we'll aim to do that in the next few minutes. So for the next short while, we're going to discuss some of our memories and thoughts about Terrance Dicks, who was, among other things, script editor, script writer, playwright and author for Doctor Who. And I'll start with a short anecdote of how I spent a holiday in the summer of 1976 in France. I brought 2 books with me to read, which was, as it was to prove, was a little bit on the short side. But thankfully, I brought with me Genesis of the Daleks and Web of Fear, both of them written by Terrance Dicks. Someone's going to say Doctor Who and but, you know.
I was hoping you were going to say The Web of Fear and Lady Chatterley's Lover or something.
That might have been a more entertaining holiday, but seeing as I was only 8 years old at the time, probably, you know, my choice of literature was sound. Both those books I read about 4 or 5 times on the holiday because it was a fortnight's holiday and I was an avid reader at the time. But they're such fantastic stories, so well written by Terrance Dicks, that I've got such rich memories, I guess. The Web of Fear in particular, I think, became the archetypal Doctor Who story in my mind. But Genesis as well, which of course I had actually seen on TV the year before. But somehow his retelling of it added something to it. So, yeah, that's I guess one of my formative memories of encountering Terrance Dicks. One of you?
Well, Target books for me as well, in that his name was just all over them. And I've been thinking today about not necessarily a specific instance, but the involvement of the Target books growing up and you know, grandparents, my nanny buying me second-hand books from Bolton Library and trips to Bolton Library to go and see the Target books in there. And I think it's that which has affected me, and looking at comments online, I think that's the comment that has most come out, you know. Not dramatically hyperbolic statements about him being the guy who got a generation reading or taught a generation to read. And for that reason, it's quite surprisingly impactful, the passing.
What sort of age would you have been, Tim, when you started reading Terrance's novels?
Target books, I would have had them and sort of put off reading them from any age. 4, 5, 6, I would have had them. I wouldn't have been reading them and involved. And then perhaps in the later 80s, later 80s, I would have started reading the Targets. In the end of my first year secondary school, we had to do a report in the English class about the books we'd read that year. And me being a clever dick, I reeled off about 30 Target titles. I can't remember whether they were Terrance Dicks or not, but you know, a fair proportion of them would have been. And my parents went to the school evening and came back and said, "We want a word with you," because Mr. Winder, my first year secondary school English teacher, who was of classical education, was telling my parents what an impressive and voracious reader I was, because I've just reeled off trying to show off all these Target books that I'd either read or had. So I've been thinking about that sort of thing today.
Oh, you got away with it, did you? I was thinking I had a similar experience, but
I got away with it with Mr. Winder. We used to suspect he was drunk all the time, but I didn't get away with it with my parents because they knew exactly what I was doing.
Yes, we had I mean, my teacher didn't tell me I shouldn't be reading them because that's not really his purview, but we did have there was a badge you could get. He was trying to encourage reading, so he set up this readership scheme, and you got a little badge, enamel badge. I could believe Peter won. It was supposed to be that prized. It wasn't. But anyway, you handed in the list of books you'd read, and you got a point for each one, 2 points if it was a classic. And I handed my list in. I'd read a lot of proper stuff, but then when it got to half the list was padded out with Doctor Who, and he grudgingly gave me half a point each for all of them, even though they were... I'm still rankles to this day. Mr. Rowan, if you're out there, you swine.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, my first experience of Terrance, I wasn't sure where to start. I mean, chronologically, it would have been watching Horror Fang Rock, but then there's a gap of a few years until I get reading the targets. Terrance wasn't the very first one. I think I started with Doctor Who and the Daleks, which is probably because I knew the film so well and it would have leapt off the shelf at me. The second one, rather randomly, I remember to this day, was State of Decay, and that was because it's one of the few, I think, it came out so close, hard on the heels of the television version, that it was still fresh in my mind, so I went for that. I remember writing stories about mysterious strangers called the Three Who Rule at school after that. I was a very original writer even then, bursting with ideas of my own. But then, so Terrance, was definitely the one who got me up to speed on reading the targets, because they were so readable. Some of them were among the best that the range had to offer. Some of them, I'm sure he would be the first or second to admit that not all of them were, but they were all readable. It's the one thing you could never take away from it.
It doesn't matter, does it? That no one's going to pretend they're high-minded literature, are they? But it got people reading. He got people reading.
Yeah. Yeah, the early ones were certainly... probably had more literary merit to them, but they as you say, they were all very readable. They even the 108-page ones, they got through it at a rollicking good pace, and for young readers, that was probably about as much as you wanted to read in a book.
If he had a skill as a writer, which he undoubtedly did, it was making things very, very clear with a minimum number of words, because you didn't have that many number of words in a target book, and that you were left under no misapprehension about what was going on or what he was trying to describe. Obviously you'd know what Peter Davison looked like already, but when he describes him with a pleasant open face or whatever it is, you think
a blurry rehearsal photograph of him on the front.
Yeah, but you think, bing, he's nailed it. I think thinking about it, the first one I probably read, because I am a bit younger than you, Paul, and 30 or 40 years younger than you, Richard. But the first one I probably read was The Five Doctors. I probably made a beeline for that, because that's probably the first thing that I was conscious of from the TV, or we it's certainly not the first video we owned, but I think that would have been the first one that I sort of well remembered from the telly, and so would have made a beeline for that. When I became aware of the books.
Sure. I mean, funnily enough, The Five Doctors was the only one that I've ever had where I started reading the book before the thing was aired on TV.
It's infamous for that, isn't it? It's infamous.
I assume I did. I can't imagine I'd been able to resist it. Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to say about Terrance's books is that even in the period when he was churning out 12 a year, he would always find something to add. Even if it was a little clarification, like you said, Tim, or even a funny line of dialogue that wasn't in the original script. He would never simply transfer it to the page and think, job done. There are so many lines that I remember, funny lines from those late 70s stories, that when I came to watch them on video 10 years later, I was disappointed to find they weren't there, and they're always in Terrance's novels. Yeah. Sometimes even in his novels of his own programmes, of course, because it's never too late to improve upon something.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that he wrote that made a big impression upon me as a youngster was the making of Doctor Who. I mean, it's a fantastic, or at least it was at the time, explanation of how they made the television programme, as well as a run through of all the history up to that point. I mean, it's perhaps, now you come to look back on it 30, 40 years later, a bit thin, but at the time, again, still probably 8 or 9 years old when it came out, it had me captivated, and it was a fascinating read. And of course it was the first mention of the missing episodes as well, so it had quite a big emotional impact on me. One
comment that I saw on Twitter, it may have been Matthew Sweet, or it may have been someone retweeting him with further comment, is that I associate with this, and this is true for me, in all the books they have in the house, and I have plenty of books, the biggest number by the same author is Terrance Dicks. I imagine most people will have 50 or 60 books by Terrance Dicks in the house. That's quite something, isn't it? To have all of us with all of these great books that we cling on to for mainly nostalgia reasons, I suspect. But that's quite an impact on many, many, many people. It's brilliant.
Yes, indeed.
Is that book's done?
I think so.
Yeah. So perhaps the next thing I wanted to say was that I only ever saw him once, and it was at a convention in the 1980s in London. And I can't say that I remember a huge amount about it now, 30 odd years later. But of course, we've seen him so much on all of those documentaries, on the DVDs and VHS as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess what came across to me was that he wasn't trying to big up what he'd done in the programme. He wasn't trying to be the star. He was very happy with his position, in Doctor Who history. He seemed very comfortable with who and what he was, and he was always looking for an entertaining story to get the crowd smiling.
He stuck with 3 or 4 in the end, though, didn't he?
Well, yeah.
I jest. I've never met him, but the one thing that I take away is, yes, he had no self-awareness when it came to telling the same fantastic stories all over and over again. But secondly, he's always upbeat on everything I've ever seen him in. He's always jolly. He's always smiling and has a sort of smiling eyes, doesn't he? When he's telling his telling his stories, and that seems like a great way to be, and nobody I've ever spoken to have met him or ever says he was a bit of a diva or anything. He always just seemed very smiley-eyed and happy to be remembered for what he did 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's fantastic.
And it seems as if there's only the 2 really sort of great partnerships in the history of Doctor Who. The Terrance Dicks and Barry Letts, and then Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe. None of the others seem to have quite got on with each other in the same way. But but Terrance and Barry seem to be a perfect double act, really.
I think, in comparison with Hinchcliffe and Holmes, the slight difference would be I think they were closer as friends, and possibly not quite as tight artistically. I think Hinchcliffe and Holmes did see the programme exactly the same way. I think Barry and Terrance were rubbing along, and more than rubbing along for 5 years, but really they did have slightly different ideas on the programme, and by the end of it, Terrance was letting Barry have his story once a season, wasn't he, to do his thing.
Yeah.
Get his Buddhism out of his system, which
ideologically opposed people.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've heard Terrance Dicks advocating empire.
Yeah.
And that isn't Barry's way, but what a great partnership that formed, because you had the 2 ideas rubbing off against each other, as Paul says. And I don't want to get into it, but it's that sort of creative friction that allowed them to have great political allegory running through their things and having a ripping yarn at the same time, and you could tune into one or the other or both.
Yeah.
You still had that choice. Which is something that's sadly lacking more recently. And I reflect on that a lot.
Terrance would never let Barry get too, even assuming that was ever a possibility, wouldn't let him get too up himself with the spirituality or that side of it. It would always bring it back down to earth. And it always reminded that at the end of the day, you're just tying the girl to the railway tracks and the hero, so the hero can rush in to save her from the moustache-twirling villain. But of course, the fact that he would constantly sum up his own approach to writing in terms as reductionist as that is just a sign of his modesty.
Yeah.
He knows that he was a much more intelligent writer than that, but he doesn't want to discuss it. He's not interested in discussing the text. He just writes it, gives it to you. You enjoy it, you move on. And I've always found that refreshing.
And I suppose, again, it's easy to over-exaggerate these things, but he is part of that team that not only sustained Doctor Who or rejuvenated Doctor Who in 1970 and left it in the best shape it had been up to that point by 1974.
Yeah.
And Hinchcliffe and Holmes were standing on the shoulders of giants in that sense, and that they built upon it, and then carrying on to the mid-70s through when Tom Baker started disappearing off. You had the whole culture of Doctor Who being sustained through the 70s and 80s by his books. So he's had a really immeasurable impact.
Yeah.
I was thinking in rather a morbid way when we messaged each other to say, shall we do a quick podcast just to get it off our chests, sort of thing. That I don't want to be morbid, but I can't think of many other people passing away now that would have had as big an impact on social media or in the news or whatever, or certainly how I feel about it. I can think of one or two, but no more than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just listening to the radio this evening, 5 Live, and there was mention made.
It was on there, was it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, just in passing, but people of all walks read those books. It's not just the rabid fans. A lot of boys, I suppose, in particular, but also girls read those books growing up and would identify it, even if they weren't consider themselves fans now.
Oh, he's well known, I think. I mean, his name would have been almost ever present on the TV in the 70s with Doctor Who or the classic serial or whatever else he did. Funnily enough, my mum rang me the other day and I mentioned Doctor Who books, and she went, "What was the name of that writer? Terrance Dicks, was it?" And she had a sort of subconscious memory of the name. So he's a big name.
Yeah.
And I hope he gets lots of coverage and tributes.
Yeah, and there's a through line as well, right from mid Patrick Troughton, with he worked on, I think, from Web of Fear onwards. So the season and a half of the Troughton era, as well as the Pertwee era and into Baker, and all those books. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary length of time.
Well, his association with the programme itself is about 68 to 83, 15 years. There can't be many people who were longer than that. I think only Robert Holmes, who just scrapes in 1 year longer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
but couldn't be bothered writing the books afterwards.
Well, famously.
Yeah.
What did he write in the first chapter of the Time War and then passing it over?
Yeah.
Terrance Dicks.
Yeah. A chapter. It might have been an outline or a page or something. I can't.
Yes, I was being generous to the chap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I wanted to talk about was how, famously, he was the guy who kept the programme on air. I suppose there's 3 examples that spring immediately to mind on that: Seeds of Death, War Games, and the 5 Doctors. On each occasion, they're threatening to run out of time before a script appears, and on each of those occasions, once with Malcolm Hulke, but and once, I suppose, using a screenplay by Brian Hales, but nonetheless he pulled it out of the bag and made sure they weren't just watching the test cards, as I think he used to say.
Yep, professionalism, that.
And a number of times I use that expression. I must find another one.
Yeah. I mean, the 5 Doctors in particular, I think it's not just a great celebration of 20 years, but which of course it is fantastic. But actually, by some miracle, it makes some kind of sense as well. It's not just a walk on and walk off of 100 bit part actors. It actually has some kind of flow to it, I think that was a tour de force.
A great technical writer, and it's not taking anything away from his ability from his artistry, which though he would hate to be described as an artist, from his ability to come up with good original ideas, which of course he can, having created so many things that are still part of the Doctor Who tapestry to this day. But if you gave him a shopping list, Robert Holmes would make his excuses and leave, but Terrance would rub his hands and say, "Right, yep, I can do that, I'm your man," and he would make it work and he would enjoy it, and that appeals to me. Somebody who, it's like solving a puzzle as at the same time as creating something to keep the test card from at bay.
Yeah, I mean, those 10 episodes of the War Games as well. I mean, I remember coming to that one and feeling with a sort of sinking feeling, thinking, "Oh gosh, 10 episodes. This is going to be a really tough watch." And yet, the first 3 or 4 of them really zip along. I mean, they're packed full of ideas. Fantastic. I mean, there is a point maybe about episode 8 where it starts to pall a little bit, but then before very much longer, you're into the denouement of it. It's amazing to have a story so long that is so little padded. and certainly for me, anyways, stands out as a good example of that particular season. When, on the whole, there were a few flat stories there, but I don't think the War Games was one of them.
In terms of him making something work, even if it wasn't necessarily his own idea, of course, he basically made the unit years work. When he later was on record as saying he wouldn't have done that if it had been down to him. He wouldn't. He thought exiling the Doctor to Earth was a bloody stupid idea, but he made it work. And gradually, he could see the production rationale for it, and gradually weaned the show back towards what it should have been. In such a way that it becomes part of the Doctor's journey. It actually makes sense for the character the journey goes on over those 5 years. He doesn't just him and Barry don't one day say, we've had enough of this, come on, let's just change the format to something else.
So someone on Facebook earlier, I won't name them, but they said that he elevated Doctor Who to a show which older viewers could take seriously, in that season 5 was about monsters, and he would give monsters relatively sophisticated spokesmen. So he says perhaps Davros, if he seeded that idea with Terra Nation.
Would have been Robert, would it?
I went back with perhaps Slar in The Seeds of Death.
Yeah,
indeed.
But then he created the Master. So you're moving away from. It probably helps the budgets that it shifts slightly away from a reliance on four extras in costumes to having actors who can articulate lines and so on. I thought that was an interesting point, which I'd never really thought of before. I don't know whether it's true, but I'll meditate on it a little bit. I thought that was an interesting view that I'd not seen before.
Yes, I mean, it was certainly something that was in the air, this whole business of the half masks. And I mean, if Barry said to him, well, this is a new, this makeup's getting better, we can have monsters that can talk, then Terrance would have fed it back into the scripts. Yeah. Because they had that sort of partnership.
Yeah. Anything else to talk about?
We haven't talked about his own scripts, have we? We touched on the 5 Doctors. Do you want to go through them each? Yeah. We've done a few of them in passing, but...
Go on, Richard, bring that in then.
Okay, so some of the things that he wrote himself. I'll talk about Robot. I suppose it's probably the first of his stories that I remember seeing at the time. I remember Tom Baker's debut. I mean, it's not necessarily all that highly regarded, but again, it's classic Terrance Dicks in that it does what it has to do. It introduces a new Doctor. There's a 4-part adventure that works under its own terms. It has a monster, has a sympathetic monster, which is kind of quite interesting. And it introduces the Harry Sullivan into the team, who's going to be an important part of that season. And it gives him things to do, and actually it gives the character of Sarah Jane Smith an opportunity to do a bit of journalism as well. We've heard that she's a journalist. We haven't really seen it happen very much up to this point, but he remembers that's what they created her as, and gives her an opportunity to show that off. So, yeah, I think it has its flaws, but it's not many of them are to do with the script.
Is that the one where he conned Hinchcliffe into saying that
it's a tradition.
The outgoing script editor always writes the first story of the next season, so he got another paycheck.
Something you should never overlook. What an astute businessman he was.
Yeah. But again, going back to what Paul was saying, he's given a job to do. He has to literally sign off his own era and set it up for the next man, and he does it in no great.
One thing that's very odd about Robot, and I've never quite got my head around, is that he seems to invent or presage the ultimate form of the 4th Doctor, the sort of the version that's actually within Tom Baker himself, which comes out later in the Williams era. He invents that in this story.
Yeah,
seemingly from whole cloth, and then it disappears again for another few years as Hinchcliffe brings it back down to earth. I've never quite known where it came from. Was he watching Tom Baker at rehearsals and inventing this, or did he just put that idea out there and it was ahead of its time? It's very odd. There's so much more comedy in and around the Doctor in that one story than would have been required for the job he was being given. It's very strange. Anyway, any thoughts? Has anyone ever explained?
I don't know I don't know the script. I don't know how it was developed in the read-throughs or whatever. Presumably, Tom had some input into it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is the one that Barry Letts produced, so I guess it may be that it's Barry Letts' vision of what Tom Baker's going to be, and then Philip Hinchcliffe comes in with Ark in Space.
There's a tradition, of course,
idea.
that the outgoing producer gets to produce the first episode of the serial of the following season.
It's recorded at the end of the previous season, though, isn't it?
Yes.
So yeah. Sorry, I'm being pedantic.
You are.
Yeah.
For a long time, horror Fang Rock used to get overlooked, I think. Yeah. Paul Cornell, I remember, started championing it quite vigorously. He kept trying to convince Terrance Dicks that it was his best script and an overlooked masterpiece, which Terrance would have none of. But I think it might well be. Not because it's Terrance trying to do a Hinchcliffe-style story, but it is that the self-contained nature of it. It's I think it's one of the best combinations of the gothic horror that we just had 3 years of, and I don't want to say Base Under Siege.
It's Base Under Siege.
Can you edit me in saying using a less cliche explanation?
Yeah.
But they are two things that Doctor Who does very well. By and large, it's a very efficient use of the budget, except that he wrote it in a lighthouse, of course. We'll skip over that. A lot of these script editors seem to have a slightly blind spot in terms of writing things that they must have known you can't afford. But that's always been one of my favourites, and the book as well.
Is it the only headquarters under a sort of military ring fencing story that Terrance Dicks wrote?
I think it was, because of course he came in just on the tail end of that in the Traven era and immediately wiped it away.
He can write anything, can't he?
For whatever reason that they'd just done 6 of those in a row.
Yeah.
He then introduced, and season 6 isn't one of my favourites, but even bearing in mind the problems they have, but it is, one thing you can't take away from it is how diverse it is, the different types of storytelling you get through there. The same season has Invasion, Seeds of Death, and the Mind Dropper. It's,
yeah.
I mean, I guess we can't really consider Brain of Morbius because it's so heavily rewritten by Robert Holmes. But we could perhaps chat about State of Decay.
Have we got anything left to say about that, Tim?
Okay, well, in which case we'll allow your Grumpcast to have the last word on that one.
You talk about it.
I'll be absolutely honest with you. I don't think I've seen State of Decay since it went out in whenever that was, 1980. So my memory of it is somewhat limited. I remember it being quite a good twist. I guess in the end, you sort of realise that it's all about vampires. It's sort of not necessarily clear at the start, at least in my memory of it. But yeah, I mean, I liked it well enough. It wasn't one of the standout stories of that season for me.
If we pretended it was written for the position where it ended up as halfway through season 18, to me it is a comforting, moist and warm patch in a season of arid bafflegab. I think it's I think by virtue of Terrance Dicks' story and script, I think it's just fine. It loses something in there that doesn't make it one of the great standouts. Maybe some of the Adric shenanigans, maybe some of the production values, but with a few tweaks, I think it could be one of the great classics. And it's cashing in on, I hate the word, but horror tropes. But I also feel it's one of those stories that you could actually lift out of that where it's positioned mid-season 18 and put it just about anywhere from the second season of Tom Baker right up to the modern day with a few tweaks. I just feel it's that sort of story. I really love it. I don't particularly love the serial as it stands, if you know what I mean.
Well,
it's
right,
got
it's
such
nearly
potential.
there. It's just that you can feel the dread hand of Christopher Hamilton Bidmid dragging it back down to the mire.
Yeah.
Was that a joke, Dicks? 'Cause I'll teach you to try and smuggle jokes through into my high-concept science fiction masterpiece.
which would have fitted quite well with the sort of general horror tropes.
Indeed.
A silvery, thin-skinned hand reaching out of a coffin lid, and it's CHB.
Yeah. So one other thing we could talk about, but I don't think we can, were Terrance's 2 stage plays, Seven Keys to Doomsday and The Ultimate Adventure. I mean, I'd never seen either of them.
I saw the second one.
Okay.
That's it. That's all I have to say.
The Seven Keys to Doomsday, I've heard the Big Finish adaptation. It was pretty good. It works quite nicely. I think I would have enjoyed seeing that as a kiddie winkle.
Did they keep the songs in the Big Finish?
We shouldn't really have left The Ultimate Adventure till last, because we don't really want to go out on the low point. I went to see it with the school Doctor Who group, as you do.
Yeah.
It's, to be honest, as well as proving that some concoctions, no matter how much you stir them, no matter how much you season them, will never turn to something edible. There's quite a lot of rubbish in it. I think you can get a package of the 1960 David Whittaker play Curse of the Daleks,
yes.
and the two Terrances, Seven Keys of Doomsday and Ultimate Adventure, for about a tenner or something. They would really almost pay you to take them off their hands. And the first two make it worthwhile. Just use the Ultimate Adventure as a coaster, or a bird scare on the allotment, and.
Well, I have fond memories of The Ultimate Adventure. I mean, I would have been 10, but it had stuff in that I enjoyed seeing. I enjoyed seeing John Pertwee. Did you get to see John Pertwee,
good.
Paul?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
You didn't have to put up with.
I saw it twice. Tim, let's leave it at that.
Who was the
Colin,
other one you saw?
Colin was better.
I'm sure he would have been. I seem
because
to remember.
we're all excited to see Colin being given a second chance and a version of his Doctor, continuing that growth of his Doctor into something that's actually watchable, unlike the way he started.
Yeah.
So we're all excited by that. But to be honest, I don't think John Pertwee, it was lovely to see him again, quite made the most.
No,
he wasn't very comfortable in it.
No, he wasn't. But I just have fond memories of seeing him and waiting outside the stage door to get an autograph. And
did you get one?
Yes.
Oh,
and,
lucky you. I think it was in a bad mood the night I was there. But you were the right age. I was completely the wrong age for this. I was 18 or something.
And
very cynical.
I remember being impressed with the laser and smoke show that was going on. The sci-fi effects. I wonder if anyone did the hat trick of Baker, Pertwee, and Banks.
Well, it was only one night, wasn't it? For
anybody out there, if you did the hat trick, please get in touch.
Yeah.
And we have a very special prize on offer.
Yeah.
Okay, any final thoughts before we kick this into touch?
Did he write any big finishes, Paul?
I don't. Well, again, that's not really very fair. He did. He wrote a sequel to The Ultimate Adventure, which is. They never commissioned him for anything. Hang on, he might have written an episode of Sarah Jane Smith. They did some Sarah Jane Smith stories early on.
Yes, that's right.
I think he wrote one of them. Yeah, they could have made better use of him. But there you go. But I think his work on the New Adventures in the 90s and into the BBC books is very well thought of. Have either of you read any of them?
Yes, but
especially the earlier ones.
The Virgin books. He wrote one of the first 4, didn't he? Which I read yonks and yonks and yonks ago.
Exodus.
Yeah.
Most of his books were based on extrapolating ideas that they'd previously used on a TV program. So they did quite a lot of the stuff with vampires. Blood Harvest is probably the best for my money. Where he.
Sure. I'm very positive that it's a great skill he has of, like you say, doing the shopping list. I mean, he's not Terry Nation, is he? Who would just repeat and recycle, recycle.
Absolutely.
He was a completely more adept writer.
He's the opposite. He has more than one. He has as many plots as he has stories. He's not just rewriting the same plot with different character names.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I've had a very nostalgic day.
Yeah.
Thinking about my youth, thinking about Terrance's influence in it, and it's very sad to see him go, but these things happen. But by Jove, what a contribution he's made to this hobby we share. What a contribution he has made. Nice one, Terrance. Yeah,
I can't really top that.
We should raise a glass to him. That's what he would have wanted.
Indeed, yeah. Yes.
Someone else commented that he'll be sat on a cloud with Barry chortling about the height of John Pertwee's Buffon all over again.
Fantastic. Well, look, thanks for spending a bit of time to reminisce about that. It's been fun, and it's sad circumstances, but it's always good to remember the great times that we've had.
Yes, quite.
And so we'll be back with a Something Who proper in a few weeks' time, but we just wanted to give you some of our initial thoughts this evening as that news sunk in. So thanks Tim.
Thank you. Cheerio.
And thanks Paul.
Yep. Bye for now.
And we'll be seeing you soon.
Is that all right?
I think that'll do.
I forgot to say where I first met Terrance. It would have been the Folkestone Literary Festival in 1990, and it's in the Grand Hotel. I'm sure you know it. And by an amazing coincidence, I was back in the Grand Hotel in Folkestone last week with the wife and the local history society, and I hadn't been there since that day with Terrance Dicks, and I was reminiscing. I was saying, "Oh, there was the room. And it was a proper literary festival, but he was presenting his bit mostly to children because he never forgot that it's supposed to be a children's programme. He was quite close to that, having worked on the novels. So 2/3 of the room was children, and then there was a load of us scruffy-looking Doctor Who fans at the back. And he steadfastly refused to pitch it to us. He just addressed it downwards to the children, going on about how great the first 4 Doctor Whos were. And then afterwards, I got his autograph and asked him if he wanted to be the producer of Doctor Who, because the position was vacant. And he said, why not? But it never happened.
Is it the only headquarters under military...
If I had any idea where you were going, I'd try and help you with it.
He's trying to find a different way of saying base under siege.
Can I is it the only military headquarters under... No. Is it the only headquarters under a sort of military ring-fencing story that Terrance Dicks wrote?